Welcome to Empower with Nancy's podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration, motivation, and leadership insights to help you feel empowered and equipped and live a life of fulfillment one day at a time. Hello, everyone. I am honored to have a special guest on my podcast today, Tracy Packiam Alloway, PhD, award-winning psychologist, professor, and TEDx speaker. She has published 15 books and over 100 scientific articles on the brain and memory. Dr. Alloway shares her insights about her brain with Fortune 500 companies, and her research has been used in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg. As a teaching professor and her private psychology practice based in Jacksonville, Florida, Dr. Alloway helps many women learn how to use their uniquely female brains to live their best lives. Welcome, Tracy, to my podcast, and I'm so very grateful to have you as my guest. And so we're going to have an exciting time today with our interview, and so let's get started. Are you ready?
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So let's start with the first question is, Dr. Alloway, can you start by telling us about your work as a researcher and psychologist?
Yes, so my work started with looking to explore memory and how we remember things, why our memory starts declining as we get older, and more importantly, what we can do to preserve and keep our memories working at its optimal stage. And over the last sort of 5-10 years, my research interest has shifted to look more at mental health, to see how memory affects our happiness, our depression, our anxiety. And as I began doing this research, I noticed a lot of times the studies are almost a broad brushstroke, a kind of one size fits all. And as a female psychologist, I wanted to really unpack that and see, well, how are our brains working? What is unique about our brains? And more importantly, how can we maximize and harness our unique strengths so that we can be a better version of ourselves?
Wow, that is amazing. And do you see that being very difficult, learning people's brains and how they work? And do you see it more where we have to focus on eating healthier, exercising? Because sometimes when we don't take care of ourselves, we tend to have brain fog. Can you kind of share a little bit about that? Does that kind of sound right? I'm sure there's so much more to what I'm asking.
It's certainly daily habits play such an important role, just like the things you mentioned. There's nutrition that's unique to the female body that can affect memory in the female brain. So we also know that the female hormones have a unique impact, obviously through adolescence and the teenage years, but also through pregnancy. So when we talk about the pregnancy brain, it's a very real hormonal impact that it's having on our memories, where the changes in our estrogen and progesterone can result in forgetting, where women will report, why did I put the milk next to the plate? So why did I leave my keys in the dishwasher? And all of that is not just them forgetting. It's a function of hormonal changes that are having a knock-on effect on memory. And so these changes are very real and also unique to the way the female hormones are structured. We also know that the way the female brain reacts to mental health, for example, women have more of a certain hormone or neurotransmitter known as norepinephrine that makes us more sensitive to feelings of depression and anxiety. So when women talk about, why can't I get out of this loop? I'm just stuck in this cycle. Right. I'm thinking, in part, it has to do with the chemical structure. Now, none of this is deterministic. Just because we're set up this way, it doesn't mean we're forever this way. And that's what I find very exciting as a psychologist, that once you know how to describe the behavior, we can then look to understand, how can we change that behavior? How can we work with what's our strengths? And also, how can we boost what we may need a little boost in? And so certainly habits play a big role, not just in what we eat and how we affect our memory, but also in understanding the chemical structure, our serotonin levels, our dopamine levels, when it comes to our mental health, our depression, our anxiety.
When you talked about our hormones going through, certain women start menopause, it could be in their 30s, 40s, sometimes even in their late 20s. And menopause, as the time goes on, it does affect your thinking and the fogginess at times, the lose of sleep, right? The hot flashes. So all that comes into play on how your brain functions, right?
It's so important. But again, the exciting thing is that there's a lot of things we can do to create a buffer against that. So when I talk about memory tips, I often talk about 3 types. If you think of it on a time, you have slow acting, where there's certain foods that we know from research can really boost our memory. Things like what we call flavonoid-rich foods. So these are the things that give the food its beautiful colors. The blue in blueberries, the green in kale, spinach, those bright, vibrant colors in our food. Those are what we call flavonoid-rich foods. And there's a lot of research to show that eating those on a regular basis actually improves our memory. So whatever level you feel like your memory is at, or whatever fog state you can watch and track that over a few weeks and see that benefit. A fun food that is also based on research is dark chocolate. So if you're a chocolate lover, substitute your milk chocolate bars for dark chocolate of 70% cocoa solids. And studies have shown that this improves memory and can last up to 2 hours. So if you're like to drink hot chocolate as the weather is getting a little cooler, put a little dark chocolate square in there. Enjoy the benefits, not just to your taste buds, but to your memory as well. So those are what I call the slow acting. We're not going to see those benefits right away, but include that in your daily patterns, like you're talking about, your habits that you're talking about. And the second aspect, I talk about medium acting, where when we learn new information before bed, for example, or before a nap, what happens is a very unique phenomenon. Our brain locks that information in our memory and almost stores that, are more likely to remember that even a week later. So if you have to learn something new for a presentation, something at work, maybe even just something for a family event, do that before bed, just before bed. Don't pick up your phone afterwards.
Right?
And your brain will be more likely to remember that. Another tip from my own research lab is drawing. Grab an empty blank piece of paper, take 20 minutes, set your timer, and drawing activates a working memory because it's encouraging you to plan. What do I want to draw? What colors do I want to use? What do I want to create? And it's giving your memory a mini workout in that short 20 minutes. And we found it can improve your memory substantially. So these are a few things. If you're a patient and you think, I don't have a few weeks for good food patterns, I don't want 20 minutes of drawing, I want now. There's research to show that chewing peppermint gum will actually release your memory.
My favorite.
Oh, good. Good. You're already doing it.
My favorite, Tracy. It's funny you say that because I think I do a lot of my reading right before I go to bed.
Wow.
Because it's mainly before I go to bed or like in the morning after I do exercising and what have you. But you are right, though. It's putting the phone down and not paying attention and looking through your reels and social media, really reading. I read that a long, long, long time ago. And I'm like, I'm going to try that. And it works. It really, really does.
I love that you do that, Andy. That's fantastic.
I do. I don't know why I can't I'm more calm at night. Like my husband says, I'm going to go up in bed, but I don't want the light on. And I'm like, but I want to read. And I'm like, it's okay. I'm going to go in my office or downstairs in a quiet area and read. I tend to absorb more than I would in the morning because then your brain is like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do this. And you're not calm, right? So, but thank you for sharing that. Wonderful information. Very powerful. You wrote a book. Share a little bit about Think Like a Girl is about and why you wanted to write it.
And again, this builds on my interest in understanding the female brain and more importantly, what we can do. So instead of someone saying all of us are like this, I wanted to know what's unique about us. So for example, a lot of times we have these social views or cultural views where we're told, oh, women are always emotional when we're upset. Women make poor decisions when we're stressed. So we hear these myths, if you will, these sort of statements that we begin to believe ourselves. And I wanted to unpack some of these common myths, like, are we more emotional when we make decisions? Are we more susceptible to mental health issues like depression? And I wanted to look at the science behind that. So for example, when it comes to decision making, I found that actually what motivates the female decision-making is this need to protect. And I found this in my research lab. We did a really interesting study where it's called the trolley dilemma. And some of your listeners may have come across it. It has shown up in some popular TV shows like The Good Place, where there's a trolley coming at you. It's going to injure people, but you can prevent that by only injuring one person instead of five. What will you choose? Who will you save kind of scenario? And often women are accused of being immobile, like making a very emotional decision. And what I found in my lab is that what is actually happening in the female brain is that they're so motivated to protect that it is perceived as being emotional because they don't want anyone to get injured. And so knowing that as a female can be so powerful because instead of maybe guilting yourself into thinking, why didn't I make a decision? Why didn't I do that? You can have that understanding, well, it's not that I didn't make a decision. My decision-making was motivated with trying to minimize harm. Is there a way that no one gets hurt? What can I do? And sometimes that pause, that contemplation to think, how can I prevent injury can be perceived as indecision. And we begin to believe in that. Sometimes we begin to believe in that narrative that, maybe I am emotional. Maybe I can't make a good decision. And I wanted to kind of change that narrative and really look at the science behind that.
Well said, because all of us women, we always tend to say, either the men say, you're so emotional. And then what do we think? Oh my goodness, we're so emotional. And then we tend to not make rational decisions, or if we're so upset, because most women are very passionate, right? And we make quick decisions. I know from myself, I'm a very driven woman. And when I know I want to do something, I don't do it off of emotion. It's a feeling, but it's something where I feel excited about. And if it's something I feel excited about, I'm going to just go for it. But sometimes as women and sometimes men, when we tend to get hurt, then those types of emotions can be hurtful emotions, right? And then we say things that we don't mean to say, react to things that we shouldn't react to. So is that something that is common for women when you're rationally making those decisions because you're hurt? And a lot of women are very sensitive to that and they don't like to be hurt.
Yes, I actually talk about that in one of the chapters, this idea of what I call radical empathy. And if you think about it in the workplace context, that sometimes as women, again, motivated by this desire to protect, we're so conscious of everyone else's emotion that sometimes we don't even give constructive criticism. We don't share, hey, we can be more efficient workers if we do this. And that radical empathy can be a negative. So rather than thinking of, is there a right or wrong way, I often say, as a licensed psychologist, I say to my clients, ask yourself, is it helpful or harmful? So is your empathy, your desire to protect, is it harming maybe your workplace environment because you're so focused and invested in protecting your colleagues that you're not actually sharing ways in which they could be more productive or efficient workers. So you're doing both of you a disservice.
Right.
Conversely, that way to be rational, to share that information, even though it may come at a risk, maybe it may not be taken well, that can be helpful in the long run because you're looking at the big picture. You're saying a whole company can benefit, a whole endeavor can benefit from this change here. So I think asking yourself, is it harmful? Is it helpful? Can be a good mindset shift rather than thinking, is it right or wrong that I say these things?
That I definitely agree with that. Over in the corporate world at an executive level, managing people, so you really have to think before you react sometimes because it can be harmful, right? Especially in a workplace. So thank you for that. And then why do you think that a woman understanding her unique brain makeup is important to her personal and professional life?
I love that question, Nancy. And you talked a little bit about how when you make decisions, you think about how it makes you feel. And I also address that very notion in the chapter on risk taking. Again, another thing that we hear is women are not risk takers. We're risk averse rather than going towards risk. And I found that that isn't necessarily the case. A lot of times the research has focused on physical risky activities like skydiving or jumping off bridges and those very physically risky activities. They're not looking at risk in the workplace. They're not looking at risk in our jobs where women will say, you talked about being driven. I really wanted this. So I was willing to leave this job and start my own business and be an entrepreneur, for example. That's a big risk. And we often, or at least the research, often forgets that type of risk that has a more meaningful impact in our everyday life. And the research that has looked at that has found that women specifically will take those kinds of risks. So they're not risk averse, but they do make those decisions based on emotion in a positive way. They think about,
Right.
what does that decision offer me? Does it make me feel happy?
Yes.
Am I happy at quitting my job and starting this new business? If the answer is yes, they don't even perceive it as a risk. They just think, yeah, I'm doing this. This is exactly what I'd like to do. And so sometimes, and this is a good example of how sometimes the research misrepresents what risk is like across the board, and also how women consider risk and how they use emotion to guide some of their major decisions like that.
Yeah, it is something where I always practice in my life coaching is people need to be empowered and fulfilled, right? It's so important. If you don't like your career or your current job, really think about it. Doesn't mean to make that emotional, quick decision to run off. But if you haven't been happy for a really long time, ask yourself why. And it's okay. Fear usually gets in the way, right? And we have to rip that Band-Aid off to move forward with something that we desire and we feel excited about and fulfilled.
Yeah.
So thank you. And let's talk about one of the myths, right? We kind of talked a little bit about this, that women make emotional decisions when stressed. One, can you please share unique pieces of advice to help women make less emotional decisions?
Yes. And just picking up on what you just said, when you're talking about the workplace, are you happy? Are you fulfilled? It's not about running off. It's not about just saying, oh, right now I'm unhappy, so I'm going to just quit everything and run away. Right. But in the moment when you are thinking, I had this other job offer. It does involve moving maybe to a different city or different state. What should I do here? And this is a good example where it could be hard to decipher between what am I feeling versus what do I want professionally. And so I found a fun way in my research lab that if you stick your hand in a bucket of ice up to your elbow for 1 minute, what it does is it turns off your emotional brain a little bit. And I know we've been talking about the power of emotions, but some cases that emotion may be yelling too loudly and you're not really able to kind of step back a little bit. So sticking your hand in the ice bucket turns the volume down on that immediate emotion and lets your thinking brain step up and say, okay, actually, this is a good job. I do feel unhappy, but cognitively or rationally, this is still a better decision for me, even though it involves moving. Because your emotional brain is thinking, this is cold, what do I need to do? And it almost keeps it occupied. So your thinking brain can kind of step up and make this decision. I want to kind of think through things here without the emotional brain yelling out so loudly. So that's a quick tip if you find yourself kind of debating between two options and second guessing and maybe thinking, is this an emotional decision? Am I being impulsive or is it actually a good decision? Maybe sticking your hand in a bucket of ice as you play out the pros and cons can be a good way to turn the volume down on your emotional brain and let your rational brain step up for a moment.
Wonderful information. Does it matter if it's the right hand or the left hand? Because, we have our left side and the right side.
No, it doesn't, because in decision making, we do use information from both sides of the brain. So our language centers are working, our memory is activating. So we see a concert of both hemispheres of the brain working. In my lab, I was using a non-dominant hand just because they had to use their dominant hand to click, to respond to something on the screen as they were doing it. It doesn't make a
matter. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's what before you make the decision, put your hand in a bucket of ice, cold water, right? I love it. Let's talk a little bit about how women can utilize their unique brain qualities to help them advance in the workplace, right? Because I think this is so important. And then follow up is, how can women find the right kind of leader to surround themselves with? This is a very powerful question that I think that would be very useful for my listeners.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up. And oftentimes when I was interviewing women for the book, we have this idea that your leadership style is fixed, like your height, or, that's it. This is where I'm at. I'm this kind of a leader. But in fact, what I found is leadership style is almost like a color that you want to wear for that day. One day you might want to wear blue. The next day you might want to wear yellow. And
Mm-hmm.
the sign of a good leader is the ability to adapt to that situation.
Yes.
Three types of leaders that I looked at in my research. One is a leader that's collaborative, where you're saying, hey, let's kind of come
Work
together. Exactly. And sometimes the project calls for that. You want to brainstorm, you want that creative input. Other times the project is calling for a more directive leader, where you say, hey, we're at A, we need to get to B, and we have only 1 month to do it. Let's just move in a linear trajectory here because we need to make it there. So I'll assign, I'll delegate, and we work accordingly. So a good leader knows how to read the room, if you will, and to identify in what situation do I need to be a collaborative leader versus a directive leader. The worst kind of leaders that I found, especially for females, are two types. One, when they feel they have to be directive in all situations, because that is and I say better in quotes. Again, this is a myth that we are told that if you tell everyone what to do, you speak loudly, you yell it out, this is a good leader. Studies have actually shown that subordinates or employees will rate the female, not the males, but the females, as a poor leader if they feel that is not her authentic style. If that's her style, if that's what the situation calls for, that's different. But it's almost like people know, they can tell when you're adopting a leadership style that doesn't feel organic or natural for you. And they perceive that as, hey, that's not a good leader. I don't feel like they're taking me in the right direction here. So that's the first thing that I found in my research. The second thing I found is the type of leader who's passive, almost the leader that's like, I don't want to do anything. I'm worried that either will offend someone or do the wrong thing. That kind of leader, it doesn't so much affect others as much as it affects themselves.
100%.
That passive leader ends up with higher levels of stress and burnout. And in part because you're constantly battling the cycle of indecision and then guilt. Am I doing that? And it's exhausting.
Yes.
It does lead to burnout. So as a female in the workplace, recognize that being an adaptive leader is ultimately the healthiest and the most effective leader. The least effective leaders are the ones that feel they have to be directive regardless of the situation, or that they're passive. And that will end up harming you as a female employer.
Or they kind of feel that they need to be heard, right? It's my decision or the highway. Like there is no ands, if, or buts. Super, super powerful for what you said, because I 100% agree with that. And it's important for a leader to have that open door policy, and even to have employees come to you in your office. Even a personal bad day doesn't always have to be work related. Come to me, let's talk it out. Just be that listener. Sometimes you just, as a manager and executive, you need to be that sounding board, and it's super important. And how you say collaborative, everyone coming together to work together on making a decision. Those topics that you've just identified really create a phenomenal organization. Without that, you have a lot of missing parts. And one of the other things I feel is important is having employees waking up in the morning and want to be excited to go to work, right?
Yeah,
and not worried about, oh my goodness, if I make a mistake, I'm either going to be fired or written up, and they're scared, right? You don't want your employees to feel scared. You want your employees to feel heard and being part of the growth of the organization. I have to say, Tracy, do you experience that some of your clients and the people that you've worked with, where it is really difficult to find companies and their managers to work accordingly of what you said? I see it based off of my experience over the 35 years is you have some companies that give you the real tough love, right? Where you learn from it. Then you have companies that just, it's a number. It doesn't mean that they don't care. It's just that's their style of running an organization. But I see that a really good organization, the leaders start from the owners, COOs, and then it trickles down. If you don't have the right leaders, then it trickles down to where they don't feel empowered and they don't feel fulfilled. That's definitely well said. I love it. And then in the book and everything we're talking to, does it help men too? Can you talk a little bit? Because I'm sure my listeners will love to hear the men. I get a lot of clients that are males too. I really, really tell them, you know what, congratulations for coming up to say, I too need some assistance in certain areas, right? I think that sharing a little bit about how this affects men too, I would love for you to explain for our listeners.
Yes. And interestingly, I love that you brought that up. I've had a lot of positive feedback from male readers as well. Two parts. One, just that understanding in general. We all work with each other. We work with males and females. And so just that recognition, how is someone else working? How can I have insight into their mechanism so that we can work more effectively? So rather than just saying, oh, they're emotional or they're stressed or they're risk averse, how can I have that better understanding into what's driving their decision making? So a lot of times that's the feedback that, oh, it's insightful. Now I know the reasons why some of these things are happening at home, in the workplace, in my friendships, my relationships, and it allows them to have insight. And then the second comment I hear is, I love it because now my partner, my spouse, and so on, they're reading it and they have more understanding. And once you feel as a healthier person, you bring that into your friendships, your relationships. So it works on different levels. And I think certainly for male readers, and as with your male clients, any kind of insight you can have in the people that you work with is always helpful. So we're less quick just to dismiss. We talked about feeling heard. This is a way for you to hear the other side, if you will, how other people think too.
Can you talk a little bit about, as women, how we were talking about, and women make quick decisions based off emotions. But do you think that women tend to, if they need to make a big decision, right, an investment or what have you, do you think that men really analyze the situation first before making a decision? Or do you think the women say, you know what, that's what I want, let's do it, let's go? So do you think the women make a quicker decision than men?
I wouldn't say it's the speed. I think that does vary person by person rather than males versus females. But what does matter is what's the reason, what's driving that. And that goes back to a woman might think, oh, I feel good about this investment, I'm going to do it. And you may see this if you look at buying a house, the husband may say, oh, they're looking at practical reasons, location, will it last us 10, 20 years and so on. The women may walk in, the wife might walk in and say, oh, I love this kitchen, I feel great here. Oh, this would be a perfect office. I love the way the light hits it. So they're looking at that. How do they feel in this space? And so there are different ways that drive our decision. It's not so much about speed, but it's really about understanding how we're making these decisions. And again, both parties may say yes or no, and it doesn't make them risk averse per se. It just indicates that we use different ways or factors to make that decision.
Well said. Great information. Thank you for that, Tracy. And now this one would be a good question. Let's talk about a woman's romantic brain. How does understanding her brain help her in her relationships as well?
There's a lot of fun research on this topic, on attraction, on love, on longevity of a relationship as well. One of the most interesting things that I found when I was researching this book was this idea of personality traits. So we often hear, what's your letter? Where do you fall? And the big five is one of the most common personality traits. So you've got extroversion. Are you extroverted? We're probably familiar with that. Open to new experience, the adventure type. Are we conscientious, the kind of hard worker? Are we, it's now called neurotic. That's more the creative type. It's being relabeled to be less negative. And these are some of the traits, and agreeableness, the kind of that person that's easy to get along. And oftentimes we think, oh, we're looking for someone that's an adventure, someone that's outgoing, that's going to just really be out there, make us laugh. And all those are great things to look for. But what the research shows is that there are two traits in particular that are the signs, the indicators of when I say a successful relationship, the research defines success in a relationship by satisfaction as rated by the partners, as well as the longevity. So if both partners feel satisfied and it's lasting a long time, that's what is classified as a success. So the first trait is agreeableness. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're with someone that always, like you said, has to get my own way, it's my way, of the high kind of person, over time, that can be very challenging to constantly feel like you're the one acquiescing, or you're the one making the sacrifices or compromising, but the other partner isn't. So agreeableness is a really important trait where you feel you can both agree and come to some kind of compromise together that's not unequal. The second thing is conscientiousness. And it's kind of a good marker or clue, if you will, is, does the person make their bed? Do they kind of take care of everything? Are they?
So true.
But that is a nice shorthand way to indicate that if someone is attentive to these small things in their life, they're going to be attentive to your relationship. They're going to invest in you, a person, in you together as a partner, a couple. And so conscientiousness has found to be a really powerful predictor of that relationship success. The only caveat is sometimes in the 20s, if some of your listeners are starting new relationships, people in their 20s, that trait of conscientiousness can look like someone is a workaholic. They're so driven, they're so focused, and sometimes that can put us off a little. We don't want to necessarily be with that
Agree.
person. It does mellow out as we get older in our 30s or 40s. That conscientiousness mellows out a little bit, and we recognize that, hey, I can still be invested without being invested 24/7 in my job or so on. So agreeableness and conscientiousness are really powerful traits to look for in a partner.
Wow. That is definitely, I just learned a lot about that. And I like the fact that you said getting up with your partners, making the bed, making things tidy, organized, communication, having that open communication. Because it's relationships, it can be challenging, but it's if you choose it to be challenging, right? Sure. Is it easy breezy? No, but it's not as difficult as you make it. You have to have fun with it, right? This is the person that you're going to, if the relationship is married, this is the person you're going to be with for the rest of your life. It's definitely well said. So thank you for that information. And then what's one of the most major ways a woman can get out of their own way and start rewiring their brain within their certain, is it more of a myth, and how can they get out of their own way? Because sometimes women are so stuck on certain situations, right? And they just can't think outside of it. And how can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about, it's not that clinical level where you're really needing to seek extra support or therapy or medication. Right. We're talking about the kind of day-to-day where, why can't I just stop overthinking?
Yes.
And the way there's some really powerful research, it's called embodiment theory, but you're reverse engineering things. So if you think about it, when you feel stressed, your body changes. Your shoulders roll in, you hunch, you start getting tension headaches, you're tense, you're closed up, but we can reverse engineer that. So when it comes to mental health and rewiring the brain that way, there's research to show that putting up your hand and saying stop almost tells your brain, hey, I don't need to keep thinking about that. So you can just say, you find yourself overthinking, did I say the right thing? What should I, you kind of can't get out of that loop. Almost kind of stand up, put your hand up, stop, and then walk away. And that physical sign, that physical behavior is a cue to your brain to say, hey, okay, we're done. We're stopping, we're walking away. So that's one when you're overthinking. Another one is on the other side of the coin, when you want to feel a little happy, you need that little happy boost, and it's just you're having maybe a more challenging day. You can use a bite a pencil trick. And again, this is based on studies, and they've done this over hundreds of people in different countries. But when you hold the pencil long ways and you bite it, it forces your facial muscles into a smile. And it tricks your brain into thinking, well, if I'm smiling, I guess I'm happy. And so just doing that for a few seconds like that kind of lifts your mood for a little bit. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed, just grab that pencil, put it in your mouth, and it's called the facial feedback hypothesis, where your face tells your brain how to think. So these are a couple ways that we can use our physical gestures, our body, to trick our brain and rewire our brain into thinking something different.
Well, I remember chewing the pencil that way when I was younger, going to school, thinking, oh my goodness, because back then everything was in pencil, right? So let me just chew on that, not the eraser, but like biting down on it. And then the other thing, so when you put your hand up and say stop, when you're kind of going to that wrong thinking, right? You just can't get it out of your head. Is that only temporary, or does that really dissipate quickly?
Yeah, it can dissipate quickly, but again, it's almost a way to tell your brain it's a boundary setting.
It's enough.
So another thing you can say, I'm going to go to my bathroom. I'm going to close the door for 2 minutes. I'm going to just think about this, just let my mind go. But after 2 minutes, I'm going to leave, shut the door, and I can't think about it anymore. So you're giving your brain cues to say, we're done. I had my 2 minutes. I thought about it. Now stop. We're going to move on and focus on an action. What am I going to do instead of what did I do or what I shouldn't have done? So you're kind of shifting from the past to a more future directed focus.
So when you just keep having those thoughts, it's basically kind of like training your brain. Enough's enough. Just stop, right? Can we talk a little bit about, I think this is important. I always like the practice of journaling, right? I kind of go back years ago when you're in school. I like to bring this up. When you're in school and you maybe had the boyfriend or somebody you really liked and you used to write those little love letters, like you're so upset, right? You're like, oh, I don't want to give it to him. No, yes, no, yes, I'm going to do it. And then you don't. You end up ripping it up and putting it away. But by doing that, it helped you, like mentally help you just to like say, you know what? It's okay. You know what? You wrote it down. And it's almost very similar to journaling on certain things. So it could be journaling on things that you can exercise your brain on the things that you want in life. It's like that manifestation and what have you. Some challenges in order for you to just let go of that, you just start writing. Can you talk a little bit about, does that really help the brain with you writing things down, journaling, things that are upsetting you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So there are a couple pieces of really powerful research that has come out. The first is along the lines that you've mentioned, and it's called stream of consciousness journaling. You just write. No structure. You don't really care about spelling. It's almost like you're spilling your guts. You're just writing everything.
Yes.
And you're not really stopping to moderate. You're not, saying, hey, I shouldn't say this. You're just allowing your brain to process in the form of writing. And that has often been reported to be a very therapeutic and even healing way. So maybe you're holding on to some kind of hurt or anger or sadness, just writing. Today I feel blah, 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 and just keep going. You're not stopping. You're not thinking. And that's why it's called stream of consciousness. You're almost just letting your emotions take over that writing. And that is a very therapeutic process. It's a healing process. But a different type of journaling is gratitude journaling. And that is a very intentional practice. And there's so much research to show that even simply at the end of the day, saying one thing that you're grateful for can actually rewire our mindset. So you talked about a relationship. It can be challenging. It can be easy breezy or fun.
Right.
That's what gratitude does. It rewires your mindset from, oh, everything's so hard to, but I'm grateful for this. And it shifts that focus. In relationships, there's research called rosy-colored glasses, where when you're with a partner that is helping you feel satisfied, your needs are getting met, research shows that we tend to use our rosy-colored glasses. We focus on the positive. So someone else might say, didn't you notice they're chewing so loudly? Or didn't you notice whatever, they dress so differently? You're like, no, I love it, because you are seeing them through these rosy-colored glasses. And that's what gratitude does. It shifts your mindset to an optimistic mindset. You might say, okay, this happened.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that you're ignoring what happened as the event. And you put your emotions on top of that as positive. Okay, that happened. Okay, good. Now I can learn from that. Next time I'll do this. And so it doesn't discount what happened. You're not saying, yeah, that never happened, or you're not ignoring it. But gratitude shifts your focus. So you put on that optimistic lens. You can say, okay, I can do this in the future. I can make this change.
Wow. That was very powerful. And it's true. A big believer that I journal every day too, for being grateful, because it does take your mind into a good mindset and not a fearful mindset. And is there anything else, as far as your books, where can our listeners find your books? On Amazon?
Yeah, they're on Amazon, everywhere books are sold. If you type in my name, Tracy Packiam Alloway, you'll come up with all the books. I'm on social media as Dr. Tracy Packiam, and I do a weekly segment on our local ABC, NBC. It's called Mental Health Mondays, and they're great practical ways that are all research and science-based for how you can shift that mindset like we've been talking about today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I am so very, again, grateful to have you as my guest. This was a phenomenal episode and interview, Tracy, and It's been a pleasure to meet you. For my listeners, I found Tracy as well on social media. So thank you so much. And with gratitude, I look forward to many more conversations ahead. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Nancy, and for the amazing work you do. I really love being here with you today.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a rating and review, and share it with a friend. To connect with me and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow me on Instagram at EmpowerWithNancy and visit my website, https://empowerwithnancy.com to learn more about how coaching with me can significantly enhance your life and business. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day. See you next time.